2 weeks ago, I mentioned to you that we were going to look at a fellow named Amalek. I didn't know if anybody had taken a look at Amalek, because in Deuteronomy, and we're going to go there in chapter 17, Exodus 17, where God said, don't forget Amalek. Now, I've got a little system that I use to remember Amalek, and I'll show you that at the end. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to move real fast this morning. We've had 3 different Bible studies so far, one with a parable, one with an obscure name in the Old Testament called Mephibosheth, and now we're going to cover just about all of the Old Testament, talking about a guy named Amalek. He said, don't forget Amalek. I remember years ago, I was here listening to a message, and the fellow said, how many of you thought about Amalek this morning? And I said, who? So evidently I wasn't thinking about him. But after I heard that sermon, I decided I was going to remember Amalek. Because God said several times, God himself said this, don't forget Amalek. And so that's going to be the general title this morning, don't forget, remember Amalek. And as I start, I'm not going to, hopefully I don't put anybody on the spot. Does anybody remember anything about Amalek?
His name starts with an A.
His name starts with an A? Okay, well that helps me a little bit to know that I'm not going to be repeating a lot this morning, and hopefully it will make a difference in our life. Now, does this help you remember who Amalek might be?
I think so.
You recognize the names of those people. There was Moses, Aaron, and Hur. Now that's a strange name, Hur. I don't know why they call him, but Hur. Hur was up there on the mountain, and they were praying. And you remember anything that they were doing in that picture?
When
held
Moses'
his
hands
arms
were
up.
up, they were winning the battle, and when he lowered his hands, they were
Yeah. Do you remember who he was fighting? Amalek, right.
That was good.
He was fighting Amalek. This is Exodus 17. After this, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on the hilltop with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses had instructed him and fought against the Amalekites, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the mountain, the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. But when he lowered them, Amalek prevailed. When Moses' hands grew weary, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Then Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other side, and remained steady until the sun went down. So Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his army with a sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as a reminder and recite it to Joshua, because I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it, the Lord is my banner. You probably remember that statement. Indeed, he said, a hand was lifted up towards the throne of God. The Lord will war against Amalek from generation to generation. Remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way from Egypt, how they met you on your journey when you were tired and weary, and they attacked all your stragglers, and they had no fear of God. When the Lord your God gives you rest from the enemies around you in the land that he is giving you to possess as an inheritance, you are to blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Do not forget. Remember this. Now, the red is me. I wrote that in red. So he said, how many times did he say, don't forget this? Remember, don't forget, remember, don't forget, remember, don't forget.
At least 3.
Yeah. Now that's just right here. Now in Deuteronomy, he does it again. He says all this all over again in Deuteronomy. So it was very serious not to forget Amalek. Remember this. Now what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to start here and go backwards and forwards, because it doesn't make any sense just this one little bitty part right here. The second thing is we're going to cover a lot of ground, a lot of verses. I'm not going into great detail in it, because sometimes you got to get the overview of things to understand the individual details. Some people call this the meta-narrative. Some people try to study the Bible in individual sections, but they don't know how it all fits together. And so the purpose of this morning is to understand how major themes run from beginning to end, all the way through the Bible. So where did Amalek begin? Well, he began with the birth of Jacob and Esau. Now, Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife, Rebekah, because Rebekah didn't have a child. And so he prayed with her. But the children struggled within her. And she said, now I like this phrase. You probably have said something similar to this in your life as well. And she said, if everything is going well, why am I having so many problems? You know, see, and God answered a major prayer, but that major prayer answer is not what I had anticipated. I thought it was all going to be just great, but things are not going too well with me right now, even though God answered this prayer. And the Lord said to her, and this is a second minor lesson, but a major lesson. Anytime you ask God for a question, I don't know why the rest, but God said, I'll answer you. I'll answer you. So anytime we have a problem, I always ask God, why am I having this? And God, majority of the times, tells me. And a few times I haven't, but the majority of the times, I find out why things are not going right and what I need to do to change. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall separate from your body. One shall be stronger than the other, and the younger shall serve the older. Now that's exactly opposite of the way it should be. So here's Esau. Now this is the first major thing we need to understand. Esau is Edom. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. That is a major truth in the Bible. Esau is Edom. This is the account of Esau, the father of the Edomites in the area of Mount Seir. Additionally, now this is Esau's grandson, Timnah, a concubine of Esau's son Eliphaz, gave birth to Amalek. So Amalek is Esau's grandson. Esau was the father of the Edomites. Now, excuse me if this might sound a little gross what I'm about to say, but Edom means red. Now it says when Esau was born, he was born, and I read some Jewish commentaries to see exactly what it was said. He was hairy. I mean, it wasn't that he had a little bit of hair. He was covered in hair when he was born. And he was red. Edom means red. So, I think, you know, Rebecca, look at you, got our orangutan, you know. He was a hairy person from the day of his born. He was born red. Now, some Jewish commentators say that that was kind of like a symbol of what he's going. You know, some people say red means anger, and he was an angry person. So they said, you know, he just had that red hair all over him and full of hair. So it means red. And you can interpret the redness however you want to. So he was born all red. did I go? I went backwards. Now, you remember this point about Esau, most likely. In Genesis 25, he sold his birthright. Now, the Jewish commentators, they say he was 15 years old when he did this. Now, to me, that is a very serious decision to make when you're 15 years old. Did he know what he was doing? Don't know. God held him responsible for it. He came in, he said, what good is it if I die? Now, you remember somebody else, 2,000 years later, Satan said, why don't you sell your birthright and get some food? Make some bread here, you're going to die. He said, no, I'd rather die starving to death rather than feed myself at the word of somebody else, at the word of Satan. Now, so anyway, we keep moving. Now let's take a look at the next time we run into the Amalekites. King David and the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 30. Now this is a somewhat of an obscure story. Probably not something that you have read about just recently. But Ziklag. Now, Ziklag was a city that Israel nation gave to David. And David lived there with his family and with his band of soldiers. And while David was off fighting somebody else, the Amalekites came in and attacked Ziklag, David's home, and burned it. And they captured all the women and they carried them off, but they didn't kill anybody. Now, when David got back from off of one of his raids, he got into town. You know, we had one fire in a place where I was pastoring. You know, you come in and you see everything gone. But what happens if you came back and you saw the whole town gone? And everybody in it gone, captured. That was worthwhile. Your wife and children were all gone. Anyway, that's what David came back to. And the people in the town, David, while you were out taking care of somebody else, look what happened to us. So they were ready to kill David, ready to stone him. Now there's a phrase there that has meant a lot to me over the years. So David was extremely depressed. They said he cried until there was no more tears left to cry for 3 days. And he said he strengthened himself in the Lord, and he got up and he went after the Amalekites. So he caught up with an Egyptian soldier that was part of the raiding band, and he said, "Who are you?" And he said, I'm an Egyptian. They left me to die." He said, "Where are they?" He said, "They're over that next hill." He said, "If you promise me not to kill me, I'll help you." So David went over there and he got everybody back. So that's the second time we run into the Amalekites. Now, the next time David ran into an Amalekite or an Edomite was with a guy named Doeg. Now, I doubt if you probably remember the name Doeg, but Saul, you remember, was trying to kill David several times. Well, they managed to get David out of town. So he left in a hurry. And he went up to a city called Nob, and he met some priest up there called Abimelech. And he ran into Abimelech, and Abimelech was scared to death. He said, "What are you doing here by yourself? Why are you here?" Because everybody knew that Saul was trying to kill David, and David had run away. And he said, "Look, I left so fast." Now, David was a con man too, you got to realize that. He said, I left in such a hurry that I couldn't bring anybody with me. I don't even have a weapon, and I'm starving to death. Do you have anything I can eat? And he said, "Yeah, we got some of the showbread, but that's not legal for you to eat it." "Well, we're all right. We've got to have some bread because I've got to get on with the king's business." So he gave him something to eat. Well, Saul found out about it and said, "How come nobody's helping me? All you people are so down on me. I'm all by myself. Nobody's helping me." And there was a fellow named Doeg, an Edomite. He said, "I saw David up in Nob talking to Abimelech, And Abimelech gave him something to eat and gave him Goliath's sword. He's helping David. And Saul said, you guys don't care at all for me. Why aren't you helping me a little bit? I'm all by myself. And so they said, go get that Abimelech guy. Bring him here. I want to talk to him. He wanted to talk to him. He killed 84 of them. Now he told his men, kill these priests. His soldiers said, we're not touching them. Doeg said, I'll kill them. So he killed 84 priests. One got away. And so that's the next time the Edomites show up. This is, several hundred years later. And so then the next time we see the Amalekites is with King Saul and the Amalekites. Now you probably remember some of this story in Samuel 15. God told Saul, I'm ready to fulfill that promise of getting rid of the Amalekites because of what they did to you when y'all left Egypt. He took the weak, the helpless. I'm tired of that guy. I'm ready to get rid of him, Amalek. And so, get rid of everything. Now, Saul's order was to kill everything in the Amalekites. Did he do it? Nope. No. He saved Agag. I want you to remember that name. We might run into him later. He saved King Agag. And then he said, he saved the best of the animals we're going to sacrifice to God. And then Samuel showed up about that same time. Samuel showed up. And Samuel told Saul, said, it's better to obey than to sacrifice, because rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft. And Saul, mealy-mouthed Saul, said, well, it wasn't my fault. The soldiers kept it all. I mean, I tried to get them to do right, but they didn't do it. It wasn't my fault. They kept it. And Samuel said, bring them here. I want to talk to Agag. Agag said, oh, surely they're not going to kill me now. But this is what I call a preacher. And Samuel pulled out his sword and hacked Agag to pieces right there on the spot. He said, that's what you do. That's obedience. So anyway, that happened. Now the death of Saul, there's two versions of the death of Saul. And I've tried to reconcile the difference. I don't know if it's just the same person telling the same story, two different people telling the same story from different points of view. But in 1 Samuel 1, Saul said that he was wounded by the Philistines fighting up on Mount Gilboa. And he was shot by an arrow, and his armor bearer, or his bodyguard, came up and found him. And Saul said, go ahead and kill me, because I don't want these Philistines to kill me. So his bodyguard killed him. Then the next story is in 2 Samuel 1, where this Amalekite came up to David, and he said, hey, David, I got good news for you. I was up on Mount Gilboa, and I saw Saul wounded, mortally wounded, and he asked me to kill him so the Philistines wouldn't kill him. So I killed him, and I took his crown away from him, and I brought it to you. And I'd like kind of a reward here for all this. Now, that was a big mistake on his part, because David said, how come you're not afraid to touch the Lord's anointed? He told his soldiers with him, take this Amalekite, Edomite right here and kill him right now. Chop him down. He should have known better than to put his hand to the Lord's anointed. Now, those two stories, you read them in the last chapter of 2 Samuel, 1 Samuel, and in the first chapter of 1 Samuel. You might say, well, this is a legitimate contradiction in the Bible. One way and one another way. The way I reconcile it is that the second story in 2 Samuel is what really happened. The first story is what actually happened. Now you said, that sounds like a contradiction there. Well, obviously it was the Philistines that killed him, but the reason that he died, sometimes the Bible gives the reason behind the reason. The reason behind the reason was because he let the Amalekites live. God said that's the judgment on him for letting the Amalekites live. You read in 1st and 2nd Samuel and in Kings and Chronicles, you find two different stories at times. One is behind the scenes, what really happened, and then what's on the surface happened. And so what really happened was him disobeying in the Amalekites. That's the real reason he was killed. It just happened to be the Philistine sword that killed him. That's how I reconcile the two. Now, the Amalekite took credit. He took King Saul. Anytime we compromise with an Amalekite, we're going to lose something. It's, to me, more serious losing the crown than it is to lose your life. Both of them are pretty serious. Okay, there's two. I'm going backwards. I don't know why I keep pushing the wrong button. Esther and the Amalekite. How did he show up? How did the Amalekite show up in the book of Esther on Edom? Now, you remember this guy? You remember that name, Agagite, earlier? That was the king of the Amalekites that Saul let live. So, Haman was an Agagite, or the descendant of Esau, or Amalek, Amalekite. He shows up again. The Amalekites show up again. So you see, all through the Bible, these guys are doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing. Their goal is to destroy the Israel nation, to destroy God's plan, God's purpose. Been that way since day one. That's been their purpose. And as Moses said, they lifted up their hand against the throne of God. That's what an Amalekite does. That's what Esau does. And that's what an Amalekite, Edomite, that's what they do. Now, see if you can see what is going on here in this passage. So you know the story. It could take the time. I know that y'all could probably retell that story of Esther just right off the top of your head right now. But Xerxes said, you can take revenge and you can capture all their goods. You can plunder. You can take everything they got. Go into their house, you can take it all. It's all yours. All the animals, all the furniture, everything they've got, you can have it. As well as killing them all. But 3 times here in these short verses, chapter 9, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. 15, but they did not lay their hand on the plunder. 16, but they did not lay their hand on the plunder. Why would you think this is mentioned 3 times? People reading this just a little on the dumb side. Why do you think he read that statement? Esther, or whoever wrote Esther, put that in Mordecai most likely. Why would they say that 3 times? You remember the big sin of Saul?
Mm-hmm.
What did he do?
He took it and sacrificed it.
He took it. He took all that he was supposed to destroy. Now, you know, sometimes it takes a while for somebody to learn something, but these folks there, they learned their lesson. They said, we're not touching nothing that the Amalekites got. We're not touching nothing. Now, how many years later? So remember, they were in Babylonian captivity. So they were pushing 1,000 years down the road when this finally happened. But the Amalekite didn't change. Esau didn't change. The Edomites didn't change. Now finally, the Jewish people, they said, we're not touching anything they got. I mean, it might take us a long time to learn something, but once we learn it, it's learned. I guess that's East Tennessee. we know it. We know what they're talking about. They didn't touch anything. Now, we move forward. Now, here's the last Edomite. By the way, I mentioned this on further down. The book of Obadiah is an entire book about the Edomites, about how they're going to be destroyed. Now remember, way back in 1800 years before Christ, when the first battle took place with Moses, that's when 1800 when Esau was born. It's 1400 when they had that battle. But it's been 1800 years now, and finally coming to the end of the Edomites. Now, who's the last Edomite? If you don't know, it's probably going to surprise you. King Herod.
King Herod.
He was the last Edomite. He is from the descendants of the Edomites. And now, do you remember what King Herod tried to do to Jesus? When he found out when he was born?
Having kids, that old baby boys killed.
Yeah. So it doesn't take a lot of study to realize a common theme between Esau, Edomites, and the Amalekites. Their number one goal, if they could, is to stop Jesus from coming. And they tried to stop him coming out of Egypt. They tried to stop him with Herod. Tried to stop him with Esther. Everyone. Now, you remember when Esther, the feast that they had with Esther was Purim. Now, Sharon's getting ready to go to Israel again in a couple of weeks. And a lot of times, you go over there in the month of Purim when they're celebrating Esther. Do you remember, you may not, I mean, this is obscure history. When, at the end of World War II, Eichmann and those other guys were hung for their war crimes. One of them said, "We're experiencing our Purim, the time when Haman was hung. This is our Purim for what we did to the Jews during World War II." And they knew all this history. I mean, they had really no excuse. I mean, they knew that whoever tries to kill the Jews is going to get hung, especially the way they were doing it. And they said, "This is our Purim. Now we're experiencing what happened to Haman after he tried to kill the Jews." Now, they were going to meet there, and that's just now, I didn't take a lot of time. I don't have a lot of application to this message, this Bible study. First of all, I'm trying to get a little information from you on what you think about all of this. If you knew this before, if any of it is new, did you see the big picture of Esau and all the way down the line to the time of Herod? Now, can you think of anything in the New Testament that's a little bit similar to this with Esau and that conflict? Some people, I've talked to some people and I kind of thought it that way myself. You get saved, everything becomes new. I thought, boy, this Christianity is going to be pretty easy here. There's not going to be much problem with this. I'm just going to stop sinning. Going to be on my rosy way. But Paul said you've got a war going on between the flesh and the spirit. You have to battle. And all those other verses of scripture that said the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God, the pulling down of strongholds. Now, it may have been a little easier if we could have swords and guns to fight the devil, but we don't, like Moses did with swords and arrows and clubs and sticks. But we have spiritual warfare. You've probably said dozens and dozens of books are written on spiritual warfare. So there's going to be a fight the fight of faith. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. But even though it took 1,800 years for Esau to be totally annihilated, and the first Christians thought it was going to be over with in a short period of time, we're still fighting that battle. And some say it's going to get worse, but we got individual battles going. But the main theme is that God is going to give the victory. We go into the battle more than a conqueror. And I hope that you could take some time and think about the battles and about how God has already given the victory. And it might take him a little while, but the last Edomite's going to be destroyed. That's in the New Testament. One comment that I got, it's not a good idea to cause harm to the Church of Christ, Church of Jesus. That's not a good idea. That's one battle that nobody's going to win. Whoever gets into a fight with the Church of Christ, obviously not the Church of Christ, but whoever gets into a battle with the Church of Jesus is going to come up on the short end. Now, the last application is in Hebrews 12. Look carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up and cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Lest there be any one of you a fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterwards, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it with tears. Now, you saw my screensaver here that I have. Now, I named these two guys. One is Esau and one's Amalek. And so every time I turn the computer on, I see Esau and Amalek coming after me because they haven't changed. I'll just close with one quick story that is a fable. You remember the frog and the scorpion? The scorpion asked the frog, "Can you give me a ride across the river?" Remember that old story? And so frog said, "Well, you're gonna kill me." "No, I'm not gonna kill you. Why would I kill somebody to help me get across the river? I can't get across." "Okay, jump on, but promise me you won't kill me." So they were paddling across the river, and just before they got on the bank, the scorpion stung him and killed the frog. He said, "I thought you were not gonna kill me." He said, "That's what I am. That's what I do. That's what I am." And Amalek and the devil never becomes anything other than the enemy of Christ and the church.